I see some familiar faces already popping in and joining us for our Wednesday webinar this afternoon. Marnie, I am so excited. We have some incredible experts, and not only do we have incredible experts, but timing can't be more perfect as far as what the topic is today for our educators. We have the Grand Canyon College of Education gurus of gurus with us today who are also podcast famous. So I'm just thrilled. I probably should just mute myself now, right, Marnie?
No. Something that you just said that, such a pertinent topic. And I always think as I was a classroom teacher, March, April, May were stressful, but I'm going to say something like March is the new May, right? Like think about how teachers are feeling now. It's as if it's May. It's that stressful and that pressing. So I think this is very timely.
Absolutely. And with the pandemic, I think March is definitely May. We're trying to figure it out, but yet, wait, we have a couple more months to go. With that said, we certainly don't want you all to think that you're finished yet if you're an educator in the classroom. But we want to bring to you these amazing educators, professionals, Dr. Meredith Crichfield and Professor Emily Pottinger, and they will take you through riding the educational wave. And you're just in for a treat today, folks. So let's go ahead and get started. Definitely pop into the chat who you are, where you're from today. If you're interested in letting us know that information, we are so excited that you're with us. And I like that, Marty. March is the new May. So as we ride the educational wave, let me remind you that we are Grand Canyon University's Canyon Professional Development, Canyon PD with purpose. We do everything with a why behind it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. We can't do any of it without this amazing team that you see here. And yes, we are still virtual. We have not gone back in person personally. However, our students are in person here and there. I am Coreyraza, your MC. I have experience as the STEM Outreach Director and 17 plus years in the public high school classroom. Please follow me on social media there at Coreyraza. Marnie will also be popping in her information as far as Twitter, Facebook, and all those good social media handles. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to have Dr. Meredith Crichfield from the College of Education introduce herself and send it over to Professor Pottinger.
Thank you, Corey. I see some familiar faces here, so nice to see you all. Again, I'm Dr. Meredith Crichfield. I'm with the College of Education, a faculty chair as well as a full professor. Been in education for 17 years, 8 at GCU. I study and explore and I'm interested in teacher preparation, literacy methods, culturally responsive pedagogies, and hopefully you can find me on LinkedIn under Meredith Ray Crichfield. And I'm lucky to be with my co-partner, co-host in all things education, Emily Pottinger.
Hi there, my name is Emily Pottinger. I'm also with the College of Education, the Assistant Dean. I have 16 years in education and 10 of those actually at GCU. So I've been here for a while. My background and interests fall under areas like early childhood, elementary education and development, ESL, obviously now higher education, specifically online learning, online assessment, and all things that fall under the education bucket. So I don't think we discriminate against our interests here. And then that Twitter handle there at GCU_TOTC is actually our Twitter handle for our podcast, Top of the Class. And that is a must follow because we love to announce new topics, new things, and we love to solicit ideas from you as well as our listeners.
Thank you so much, Professor Pottinger. I cannot wait for what you'll have to tell us today. And do not forget, folks, to subscribe to that podcast, Top of the Class, Grand Canyon University's education podcast. It is phenomenal. I listen to it all the time when I'm in the car. I even re-listen to episodes, and I don't usually do that. So that's a huge compliment. So thank you so much, both of you, for hosting that podcast. I learn a lot from it myself. So let's set the stage for learning today. Meredith, if you wouldn't mind doing that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So all of us have really probably felt this last year, the tumultuousness of it, the chaos of it, but probably we've also felt some highs along the way, some new ahas or innovations that have come to us. And so we just want to remind you through all of this, as Larry Bell says, that even on your worst day in the classroom, in the middle of a pandemic, you are still some child's best hope. And we just hope that you keep that in mind as we ride this educational wave today. We talk about how to make it through the rest of the semester, provide you some resources and tools to do that, and then also think about what next year might look like.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crichfield. And I will also say, I see that Lisa Durf is in the chat there today. Lisa, welcome. And you are not only somebody, but you allow others to feel like somebody. So I just wanted to say that's a great quote for what I saw that you popped into the chat there. Thank you so much. And I do want to talk to you today about our goals and objectives. You do have the opportunity to earn a PD certificate. The overall goal today is to learn ways to navigate the shifts in education and help you complete your school year with a high degree of success. And boy, do we need that after a year of just change and strange, right? Today's objective specifically are to explore resources and tips and identify next steps to help you ride that wave of changes in education. All right, so stick around later because we'll have a Q&A with both of these experts. We really just look forward to learning about what you have to tell us. So let's, without further ado, Dr. Crichfield, you want to take us through Jamboard?
Yeah, so many of us are familiar with Jamboard. If you're not, it's a really nice virtual sticky note app. And so if you would right now, you're going to pull up this QR code. You can use your phone to do that. The photo app is a nice way to do that. Or if you have a QR reader, all you do is if you have your photo section on your phone, you pull that up, hover it over, it will bring up a bar at the top of your phone. You will click on it, and that will take you to our Jamboard. I believe we also have a link for you in the chat box that you can click on if you want it nice and easy. Now, there is a Jamboard app, so that's pretty nice little teacher tip there. If you ever want your students to get onto a virtual sticky note format, then you could absolutely do that by using the Jamboard app. But if you would, we're going to take a little look and do a little bit of a temperature check. How are you feeling professionally right now? So we'll head over to our Jamboard if you were able to snag it. Good. Oh, I see some of you have used it before. Excellent. What we would love for you to do is to click and to add, and Corey's going to show us how to do that in a moment, but add a sticky note and just say, how are you feeling? Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I'm fantastic, 1 being what is going on? Is this March or is this May? I don't know anymore. So please tell me how you feel and post it on our Jamboard. Corey's feeling exhausted here. Yes, the image. Thank you for that. Excellent addition.
I also love Jamboard on the phone. I didn't really, I've never asked my students to use it in this way, but I really think that's great. And it does allow you to edit inside of an app on your phone. But if you have a Google account, it was really fast and easy. So thank you so much, Emily and Meredith, for bringing that to my attention. See, I'm always learning little tips and tricks from both of you, so I appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. On the phone, it's a simple app, and students love it because it's a really nice way for you to check in 2 ways. One, it can absolutely be that academic formative assessment, seeing where students are with current information and gauging their current levels of knowledge. Or, as we're doing here, it can be a social emotional check-in. And don't forget, we need to be socially emotionally checking in with our students, but we also need to be socially emotionally checking in with ourselves. And so when we're thinking about riding that teacher wave, we also need to be checking in and thinking about how we're feeling right now. So what I'm seeing on the screen, some of you guys are feeling tired, you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling overwhelmed. And I think all of us can say that's only exacerbated by this pandemic, where our schools have opened and closed and we're doing multiple modalities sometimes at one time. So we absolutely can commiserate and feel how you're feeling right now. I like that someone is doing well though, and they are in all of his power. So thank you for that. And somebody gave us a thumbs up. That's good to know that you're doing okay too. So Again, this tool is a very nice tool. You can use it on your phone or as we're using, some of you are using on your computers. But in addition to that, it's a really nice way for those formative assessments to check what students know academically, but also socially, emotionally, checking in and seeing how things are going. I love that image that was just added about that very exhausted child. I think some of us have had those moments, just the heads on the table throughout this year. So thank you for that. So we'll head back to our slideshow here. Yes, those images make me laugh as well. So now that we've done a little bit of a temperature check-in, which is critical for you to do with yourselves and your students, we're going to talk about some resources and tips. So Professor Pottinger, you want to share a little bit about some resources and tips you suggest?
Absolutely. So I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Crichfield. You know, we're constantly doing check-ins with each other, checking in to see how we're doing, how we're handling things, and doing the same for our peers, our colleagues, our students. So really that social emotional check-in is so essential and kind of our first step. So you kind of want to check where are you before you start tapping into some of those resources and tips. So that's kind of why we began this session with that, because that's what we do before we really do anything, before we dive into any project, we're checking in so that we can come in with a clear mind and know really what we need, what resources do we need to be successful. Go to the next slide. All right, so the first resource that we're going to share, naturally, we have to shout out our podcast. But really, honestly, this is, it's a labor of love and really has come from a place we found a need. And I'll share the little story of how this came to be. But Top of the Class is a podcast by educators for educators. So, you know, Meredith and I were chatting oftentimes late at night or early in the morning and constantly thinking of ideas. How can we be, you know, advocates for education, stewards for education? How can we uplift the profession? And this was actually very serendipitous because we also were working on some initiatives in the college about uplifting the profession. So it really aligned very nicely. But Top of the Class became a thing. Meredith had an idea. She was, you know, cooking dinner, cooking some spaghetti, and shot me a text and said, hey, what if we start a podcast? And I said, yes, let's do it. So long story short, we spent quite a while Googling and figuring out how in the world did we start a podcast. But we really wanted to come up with topics that were relatable for educators of all kinds. So that really is where Top of the Class stemmed from. And you can see there is a QR code, but there are also some links in the chat where you can access Top of the Class. You really can find it on the majority of podcast applications, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Please, take a listen, take a peek. If you like it, subscribe, rate us. We always love the feedback. And then, like I said at the beginning, our Twitter account is a great way to get in touch with us if you have ideas for the future. So take a listen to Top of the Class. Meredith and I are so lucky and blessed to have experts in the field ranging from teachers of the year to superintendents, principals, fellow colleagues, colleagues, faculty, teachers in the field. So we've had a really wide variety of guests that bring in a plethora of expertise, and we learn something new every time we sit down and record. So it really is such a wonderful opportunity, not only for us selfishly, it's wonderful for us, but we want to share that expertise with the world. And we know that as teachers, you know, many of you have said, we're overwhelmed, we're tired, we have so much stuff that we have to take care of. Time is of the essence. And so hopefully, you know, the hope of creating this podcast was, like Corey had mentioned, in the car, or, you know, if you're doing dishes or whatever, you know, whatever home task that you dislike, dishes happen to be mine, throw on that podcast and, you know, it's fun and also you learn a little something. So I wanted to highlight a few of our sessions that might be timely. Some were recorded recently and some actually we must have predicted something, but we recorded them a while back. So just a few that I wanted to highlight. The first one, episode 36, it starts with you, self-care and compassion satisfaction. We had a guest from ASU, Jamie Valderrama. She was fantastic. Highly, highly recommend. She's just a wonderful speaker and a wonderful soul. And I think Meredith would agree. We learned so much from her, and she teaches classes and specifically on compassion fatigue and how, as educators and other fields like nursing, healthcare professions, how we're giving so much. We have so much compassion for our students or our patients in healthcare professions that sometimes that fatigue weighs so heavily. So she gives some lovely tips on how to turn the page and have compassion satisfaction. So wonderful episode to listen to. Another episode 27, mental health and self-care. We often get recommendations and suggestions to do episodes on self-care. So we were lucky and have a colleague, another fellow professor in our College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Kathy Britton, and she did a wonderful episode with us on healthcare and self-care, specifically for teachers. And she actually runs through a couple fun exercises that you can do. So at top of the class, we are teachers at heart and by profession, so we always want those takeaways, practical applications. So while we talk about thoughts and feelings and things, we really want to have that takeaway at the end of the episode. Two more episodes I wanted to mention. Episode 24, keeping things civil in a sometimes uncivil world. We had two colleagues that came on and chatted about got tough conversations that sometimes we have to have as teachers, especially now. There's many things going on in the world, and how do we have those conversations? How do we keep civil in sometimes a world that doesn't seem civil? So that's a really fascinating episode to check out as well. And then finally, episode 14, this was one of our favorites and much listened to episodes, fostering a growth mindset. This was a very popular one, and lots of pearls of wisdom in that one. So be sure to check out all of our episodes, but those top 4 would be very timely to our conversation today when we are talking about checking in with ourselves, self-care, riding that wave. How do we keep it on when we're faced with lots of challenges? So switching gears, that's one of our resources that we wanted to remind everyone that's out there, but we have an additional resource, and those are our Explore More sessions. And now our Explore Mores, they began quite a few years ago at Grand Canyon University. We wanted to develop some sort of mini sessions for our traditional ground students that students could take advantage of outside of their class time. So, maybe they just needed a little help on XYZ thing. So each college created their own Explore Mores, and we would hold them face-to-face, and students would attend these on campus. College of Education actually took things a step further. Even before the pandemic, so we were ahead of the game, we started offering them virtually. We wanted our students not only in the traditional ground campus to take advantage, but also we have a large online population. So we started offering them virtually. And then once the pandemic hit, we decided, oh, wow, we need to expand this idea. We need to have as many people tapping into these resources as possible. So we actually were able to record many of our Explore More sessions, and we have a playlist, and that's going to be shared. There's the QR code, and then it's also shared in the chat box. But these Explore More sessions, they range in topic. We have from, for our pre-service teachers, we have lots on test preparation. So, getting our teachers through those NES tests that they have to take to become certified. But also things that are a little lighter, like creating the ultimate teacher wardrobe capsule. And we also have some of our podcast episodes that we recorded live as an Explore More. So you can see us. Either you can listen to us or you can see us on some of those episodes. So you can actually see that Jamie Valderrama episode, It Starts With You, the self-care and compassion satisfaction episode. Another couple that I wanted to highlight, the more sessions. The first one I wanted to highlight is 3 trending tech trends, sorry, lots of alliteration there. This tech trends episode was, we were joined by Amanda Arrington, and she is just an expert in some of those technologies that are out there and really how she's harnessed them to benefit things during the pandemic. How is she able to utilize what's out there in her virtual classrooms to create that sense of community within her classroom, something that we really craved and really needed as this pandemic hit and as students were isolated, teachers were isolated, we were all away from each other. So that episode is a must listen or a must watch. 2 more that I'd like to highlight: tips to running a successful virtual meeting. I know we're all doing, we were just talking before we started our webinar here, we were talking about the meetings that we have, and I'm sure many of you are feeling that as well. We have meetings on meetings on meetings, and there's no gaps between meetings. And that's created a different kind of atmosphere. Whereas prior to the pandemic, if we had a meeting, we had to find the space, and there was always kind of that time between, to allow you to walk from one space to another, but now it's just back to back to back. So we talk a little bit about, how do you have a successful virtual meeting that's just not reading from a PowerPoint. And then the last one that I wanted to share, this is a 2-part episode and absolutely wonderful. 2 of our very dear colleagues and friends are on this episode, but it's called Our Students' Mental Health in Trying Times. So Dr. Stephanie Nilsson and Dr. Crystal McCabe join us, and they are wonderful, wonderful educators and experts on mental health. And they really give some fantastic tips on how to support our students during such unprecedented times. And I feel like many of those tips we can also take back to ourselves. I know many of us are juggling home life and work at the same time in the same space. So, that's a really wonderful one to listen to right now, very timely, and it's a 2-part episode. So those are just a few Explore More sessions, but please check out the full list that we have on that playlist. We'd love to have you take advantage of that resource. All right, we'll pop to the next slide. Okay, so we're gonna follow back up like all good teachers do and close this conversation. We shared 2 resources that we found to be really beneficial within our circles and within our expanded circles in the local community with school districts. But we want to check in with you. What are some things that you yourselves have used? What's in your toolbox and has gotten you through some of these challenging times? It might be a book. You might have found a really helpful website, tech tool that you've just loved. Anything that you've got in your toolbox that's helped you through this time. We would love for you to share in the chat box right now. We'll give that wait time like teachers do. The early childhood students, the seesaw. Thank you, Dr. Lisa. Jamboard, poll everywhere, yep. Those surveys I find have been really helpful, checking in with students, whether it's content-wise or that social emotional check-in. Flipgrid, Padlet, those are some of our favorites. Kahoot, VoiceThread, I have not used VoiceThread. Dr. Crichfield says, I rely on a lot of education articles from teachers reposting on Twitter accounts. There's a wealth of knowledge on Twitter and those social medias. So absolutely, and it helps see what other people are going through and gives perspective. Absolutely.
And Professor Pottinger, I'm going to jump in here because I want to say that not only have you shared some really great tools that are tangible, like Jamboard is a tangible, say, tech tool. But what I really liked about some of those episodes that you highlighted were concepts, like growth mindset, social emotional learning, taking care of ourselves as teachers. So in the chat, folks, if you have some other tips that are not just, a tech tool, and I use tech tools all the time and they're really great and they're engaging. But I also find maybe pen and paper or standing up, doing a little yoga stretching and that sort of thing can help. And I just read an article recently about Zoom fatigue and some really practical solutions to that Zoom fatigue. For example, stepping back from your camera, feeling like you're not right up in front of people, right? I mean, that's a small tip, but I think that's the kind of tip that you're looking for, right? In this teacher toolbox, especially online. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about an additional tip that's kind of that concept based, not a little less tangible than our Explore Mores and our top of the class podcast. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you're right on the button. Resources can come in all shapes and forms, and people are also resources. So like I mentioned, Meredith is a resource to me. She is a go-to where if I'm having a difficult time with whatever it might be, I know that she's my resource. So really being able to tap in, knowing your resources and tapping into those. So that's why we like to share with one another here.
And can I just add that I think it is especially critical for educators to rely on our resources, because so many of us want to go at things alone because we are professionals. We've worked hard to get the degrees that we have, to have the experiences that we have in the classroom, to make the connections and network in the way that we do. And in doing that, we can sort of start to isolate ourselves or think that we are fine to go at things alone. But the reality is that the work that we do, it's people work, not paperwork. So if you're in people work as opposed to the paperwork, then isolating yourself and just strictly sticking to only your students, let's say, then you're really doing yourself a disservice, not just in that real professional sense, but in that social emotional sense. You are losing the connections with the people that helped get you to where you are, to get you all those degrees and to get you all that experience. So we just hope that that's one thing that you keep in your mind, that as an educator, are you perhaps leaning less on people because you don't think you need it, when in reality, we're suggesting that all.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, a phrase that was shared with me a long time ago, and I don't remember who shared it with me, but it stuck with me through my entire educational career, was don't suffer in silence. And I'm sure many of you have heard that term before. As educators, especially now, if we're at home, it really can become a silo. And to Meredith's point, we personally don't want to suffer in silence, but we don't want our fellow educators to be suffering in silence. So how do we make sure that's not happening? And so part of that is checking in with yourself, checking in with your colleagues, your peers, your friends, your teacher friends. Are you okay over there? But then on the flip side, knowing what resources you have and utilizing them. So sometimes it can be a little overwhelming because there are resources out there and it's like, where do I even start? And so we wanted to give you some very tangible places to start and some concepts and ideas that it could just be the tip of the iceberg, and then it snowballs from there. So you might read an article or listen to a podcast and really connect with what's being said, and then it can kind of spiral from there. So don't suffer in silence. We want to make sure that we have that community with one another. And Dr. Crichfield and I are absolutely part of your community. So please feel free to, after this webinar, you can always contact us, and we are a resource to you all. All right, I think we can.
Thank you so much. So with that said, Emily, I want to say thank you, because I have a hard time asking for help. And making, I don't want to be an imposition. I know you're busy too, my colleague next door. So I would love to know how I set boundaries for myself, but also I respect boundaries of my colleagues. So I guess just
good segue, Corey.
That.
Absolutely. So this is what I was foreshadowing to earlier about a concept that can go in your toolbox. And this is something that Meredith and I have talked about often and was actually requested as a topic for our podcast. So we have one coming out. It's not launched yet, so you are getting a teaser here. But setting boundaries is really an important skill to have in your toolbox as an educator, especially right now. So like we have mentioned before, there is an abundance of accessibility now with technology and being home. You are accessible all the time. And that makes for an exhausted teacher, right? An exhausted educator. So we want to talk a little bit about how can we set some boundaries? What are those tips and tricks from our perspectives that might help alleviate some of that stress? And I want to say, you know, I know we all have a laundry list of things to do, and it's how do we get everything done? You know, how can I set boundaries? I have too much to do. But in fact, it's the reverse. You have to be able to set boundaries in order to get things done. So if you're not able to set those boundaries, things just pile up and you don't have that work time or that space to check off your laundry list of items that you have building up. So we've broken it down into 3 main categories with a bonus. And our 3 main categories are boundaries with parents, boundaries with students, and then boundaries with colleagues, because really those are some main individuals that you'll be working with as an educator work. So first of all, with parents, I think being very clear up front in terms of how do you want to be communicated? What's the best way to communicate? Being sensitive to differentiation, we know that that's necessary, but as an educator, as the teacher, here's the best way to get in touch with me to get, you know, timely feedback or a timely response. Be clear with that with your parents right up off the bat, and then on top of that, the times. So when is your availability to have kind of drop-in type conversations? Set those times, and if you're using tools like Remind, I know that's a very popular one. Utilize the settings in Remind to make sure that you're not getting those midnight 1 a.m. Messages through Remind saying, I need help, or my child needs help. So setting those boundaries, knowing the settings within some of the applications to set those boundaries is essential. And like I mentioned, you know, this virtual world is really blurring the line. So it's essential that you're being very clear with all parties, parents, students, and colleagues in that sense. And then try to stick to those hours. If you've set them, really try to stick to them. I know sometimes we can look over the edge, but we really want to make sure that we're abiding or honoring that time frame that you've set. And if you find yourself creeping past because of a conversation, that's something where we've discussed verbal jujitsu and the art of gracefully exiting a conversation. And that's something that it's awkward at first, but once you've mastered the technique, it just becomes part of your everyday boundary setting. So some of the examples that I've used in the past, if you've got a parent that's particularly chatty, you know that maybe you set at the beginning of the conversation, I'm so glad that you've caught me. I have a meeting in 15 minutes or whatever boundary you want to set for yourself in that phone call. Say that up front. Here's what I have following this meeting. We're going to have to wrap up this this phone call or this conversation at X time, and being very clear and sticking to that. So the art of exiting the conversation gracefully, where you're not having to cut someone off and feel rude, but you still are able to put the time frame on things. And then just being proactive. I think this is a big one for all of us. If specifically with parents, if you know you're going to have an escalated situation, do your homework, write some notes, get all your documents and ducks in a row before you're having that communication or conversation with that parent or guardian, because that's going to make the conversation go that much smoother and more quickly. So the next chunk of boundaries is specific to students. So like I mentioned before, setting that specific time and space and modality is essential. Letting them know when you're not available. It is not appropriate to, text me or message me at X time of day. And then call in reinforcements when needed. So I think Meredith and I were talking a lot about, when students are concerned, the safety aspect as well. So we want to make sure that we're protecting our students and protecting ourselves as educators. So creating that safe space in the physical environment, but also in the virtual world too, is really, really important. We've all heard unfortunate stories in the past where measures weren't taken and terrible outcomes happen. So make sure that you're setting the boundaries in that way, and making that safe space for you and for them, and bring in a colleague if it's necessary. That's a great way to make sure that you have that safe space. And then assessing the situation, obviously you want to make sure that you, as much as you can possibly know what you're going into, and knowing those resources that might assist you in that conversation. So if you know the student's having a difficult time or is going to have some sort of sensitive type discussion, is this something that you need to loop in the school counselor or your principal or an additional colleague? Making sure that you're being proactive with those elements really helps set the boundaries, because students oftentimes they share a lot with their teachers, and it puts us in a precarious position sometimes. So we want to be very cautious with what that looks like, especially, I know Dr. Crichfield has more experience with the older kids. I'm primarily early in elementary education, but it doesn't matter what age range. You want to make sure that you're being safe and setting those professional boundaries. I am your teacher. You are my student. This is, if it's something that's not appropriate to discuss, that's when you need to call in for those reinforcements.
So I really love what you're saying about perhaps planning ahead. So you've talked about parent meetings, and now you're talking about students, and this theme of plan ahead. Maybe plan for what could go wrong, in a sense, right? Now, I know that both of you are parents, and I'm a parent, and I know that's helped me to become a better teacher in some ways, only because I've made so many mistakes, right? And I think to myself, oh, right, well, had I not had that milk cup on the side of the table, it may not have, fallen down, and I'm here sitting here cleaning it up, right?
Yes.
We've all had that spilled milk concept, but prepare is what I'm hearing. And I really enjoy the fact that you're saying the art of the graceful exit, the art of the, hey, up front, I'm telling you, I have half an hour to talk with you. And you can do that with students too, right? Knowing those resources. You know what, Mrs. So-and-so next door can also help, but I only have 15 minutes, right? And then warn Mrs. So-and-so, I got 15 minutes, and then I need you to help me, get out of this situation. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. And I think we do it with colleagues too. I mean, Meredith, you can contest it. How often are we like, hey, I only have 5 minutes. Can we quickly chat about blah, blah, blah? And then we chat for our 5 minutes, and then we're off to the races. So setting those boundaries, you're not being disrespectful by it. You're being clear in, this is the allotted time I have for this conversation. If we need to continue, we can set forth an additional discussion or a meeting, have takeaways and come back around, circle back around, close the feedback loop, if you will. So absolutely, you're right on track. And that segues into our setting boundaries with colleagues and in the workspace. And right now, if you're feeling it at home, I know some people are back in the actual school setting, but having a separate workspace and personal space is really essential. And I know many of you have probably had some challenges with that over the past year, but having that separate space, close the laptop if it's as simple as that, whatever that looks like. But I have discussions often about how can we shut it off as a professional that is so ingrained, taking care of the students and doing what's best for our classroom. is so ingrained in us, but that's where that compassion fatigue can really play a role. So we want to be able to shut it down when we can. And so having that separate space is really helpful. When it comes to colleagues and the workspace, another tip is knowing your audience. We want to be really careful with what we're saying, who we're speaking with. There are some conversations that are private and not meant to be shared. Also, we do another podcast episode about the teachers lounge, and sometimes you'll hear negative things about the teachers lounge because sometimes it can turn into a gripe session, and those are some boundaries that we want to set as educators. Just be cautious, know who's around, know who you're speaking with, and be professional in those communications, and check yourself. We talk often about, have that trusted friend, trusted colleague. Am I being XYZ? Does this seem XYZ to you? Before I send this off, can you please check me? I'm checking myself, but can you check me? And know that there's always a paper trail. So just being aware of those things are some good reminders to us. Even they might seem simple, but it's definitely a good reminder, because when we are in moments of stress, some of these very simple skills and techniques can go out the window because we're in crisis mode. And if you're feeling frantic and overwhelmed, you may feel less inclined to filter. So those are some good reminders that we wanted to share. And then our very
So you're saying have a filter friend?
Have a filter friend.
Always have a filter friend.
Have a filter
Emily
friend.
and I are each other's filter friends. We will literally compose an email that might go towards a situation that's more escalated, and we send it along and say, what do you think? Fix this for me. And it's a nice way to check ourselves and make sure that we're creating safe boundaries, not just for the person that's going to receive the email, but for ourselves, and protecting ourselves and our energy that we're putting out as well.
Yep. And we are human. We are human, and we are emotional beings. And this was, man, we learned so much from our podcast. We had a recent guest, and he mentioned we are human. So we are going to make mistakes, and we're going to have emotions. And so having the filter friend help temper some of those big emotions that might be charged in an emotional situation or an escalated situation. Our last little bonus tip speaks to social media boundaries, and I think I'm preaching to the choir with these, but it's always worth mentioning. With social media, and especially as it's been extremely popular in how we connect right now through this pandemic and being isolated, as educators, we need to be very careful. What image are we putting forth in our social media? Some of the tips that Meredith and I often abide by and also share is check your username. Do you want it searchable? Could you create a different profile for private, personal life and for professional? Share the professional, but maybe keep the personal one to just your friends and family. Don't be friends with students. Don't be friends with parents of students. That blurs the boundaries and can get very sticky. And then just remember, we talked about the paper trail. Whatever's on social media, we've seen it with celebrities. It can be screenshotted, recorded, shared. So we always want to be extra careful. I have a girlfriend, and we always talk, thank goodness, social media wasn't around way back when. I think it's a lot more stressful now with access to so much personal and private information. So that's our little resource guide to setting boundaries. Put that in your resource toolbox now that we've listened, and then when we launch our podcast, we'll go in more depth on all of these areas, but we'd love to have you listen.
Emily, so I was popping that call to action when you were talking about social media, because I thought your call to action is to remember that you can always be recorded. So watch what's on there. And I love this filter friend concept. I thought about it as an administrator, having a conversation with a younger teacher who's stepping on board, because younger teachers, hey, the millennial, the Gen Zs, they're always online, they're always connected, and it's a part of their DNA in some senses. So you have to have that conversation of the call to action, filter, here's what's allowed on social media, here's what isn't. And I'll tell you what, students appreciate that connection online. So we're not saying not to be social media, not to have that, but there is a line, and a fine line. So thanks for bringing that up. I know, Dr. Crichfield, do you have some calls to action? What do you have to wrap up with us here?
Absolutely. And I think as we go into some calls, marching orders, if you will, it's important to remember why we need to set boundaries in the first place. It because, and there's a concept out there in psychology about a transfer of emotion, that as teachers, we are in positions where we are transferring, if we're not careful, the emotions of others upon ourselves. So that's why boundary setting is so important, because that student who's sad in the back corner of your classroom soon will become sad too if you don't set those boundaries. That parent who is angry, who marched into your classroom concerned about that 1 point that was lost on that 1,000-point formative or summative assessment. We've all had those situations, escalated, heightened situations. We too can start to become angry because of that transference of energy that's possible and occurs a lot in teaching. So let's think about some calls to action. I'm marching to make this happen in our own lives. So on the next slide, you'll see we kind of have a two-parter that we want you to type out in our chat box here. First, we want you to think about your plan after today, going forward. What's your plan? Not just like to identify the resources, but to make sure that you have the resources you need to feel supported. Is it someone in your family? Is it a trusted colleague? Do you need to find your own filter friend? Are these maybe apps or resources ones that you're going to tap into more? Is there something going on in your social media world you want to be more mindful of? So if you would, type now in our chat box some ideas on going forward. What can you do to make sure that you have the resources you need to feel supported and really crest that wave and make it from March to May, right? Remember to ask for help. That's excellent. I couldn't agree more. I think it's a little bit of a gut check for a lot of us as educators, because we are, by a lot of standards, high functioning. Many of us are high functioning humans. And if you're a high functioning person, the ask for help becomes that much more of a challenge for us. And so we need to humble ourselves, right? Show ourselves the grace that we extend to others. Yes, being clear about boundaries. It's so hard for so many of us. I'm sure all of us right now in the chat box could say, I'm not good at boundaries, because we all really struggle with that as educators. Excellent. So the second part of our question here is to dive in a little bit deeper into making sure you can set some boundaries for yourself. What can you do to start to set boundaries and really make sure that you have that self-care in place? Because you can't care for your students if you don't care for yourself, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. I've tried many times. Hard. So what can we do to make sure that our cup is full so that we can pour a little bit into each of our students? Share that in the chat box. Use our teacher wait time. And if you're watching this post, not live, you're watching this later perhaps, we encourage you to reflect in a notebook, right? Get out a pen, get out a pencil, old school style, and reflect on some of these questions and really dive in deep about where you are right now as an educator. Good. Yep. State the length of time you have available up front. I could not emphasize that more, because if you don't, if you say it on the back end, oh, I've only got 2 more minutes, you can get a really sort of reactionary response from a parent perhaps, or from a student or a colleague. But then also it makes that conversation more efficient, because you're focused on, okay, this is what I need to talk about. This is the time in which that I have it. Yes, set up times for social media. Believe it or not, on your phone, some of you have noticed this, you can actually disable certain apps after a certain time. So I have mine set to end at 7 p.m. and start again at 7 a.m. So I cannot look at social media sites, and I have certain ones listed that are a no-no for me from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So you can disable those on many versions of the phone, specifically the iPhone. So I encourage you to do that to kind of naturally set boundaries for yourself. All right, fabulous.
Great idea. That's some really good tangible ideas that the two of you have today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Just people need to realize that they think that sometimes Instagram scrolling is like, letting off steam, but then soon enough you're down deep into a hole, and wait, I forgot to do that, and oh, my student's having a hard time, or oh, my colleague needs this and that. And like you said,
I've heard it called doom scrolling. You can doom scroll for hours. Right. Just doom scroll from one crazy world event to the next.
Oh, really, really helpful. So sorry. are we thinking that we've got our takeaways, everybody? Are you this? I've got
you're
some
feeling
serious
good.
takeaways
Yeah.
myself.
Yes.
As you're thinking about those takeaways, we also want to let you know that we're here to support you. And I really want to say thank you to both of you for saying that out loud, like that you're a part of our network. You're a part of all of these people who are online, whether you're watching it online, live or on YouTube later. This College of Education at TOTC. I know that you all check that and you are a great resource for us. And speaking of resources, you've also helped us to see this wave that we're riding, how we can, like, what is the role of technology moving forward? And so in April, we're going to bring you bite-sized learning from the GCU doctoral research side of things. And that's April 14th, our lunchtime conversation on our Wednesday webinar. So I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for all of these amazing resources. And if you haven't checked out Top of the Class, folks, oh my gosh, what a great opportunity, and explore more. And there are more, I know, resources that the College of Education, that both you two have created, this massive resources, not only for the students that are in your program, for the student teachers that are going out into the world, but also for us teachers in the professional development and professional learning spheres. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you. You all constantly serve us. So appreciate that. Folks, we do this not lightly. We are here to empower, educate, and inspire you, our community, so that they take action. You take action to fulfill your purpose and to serve others. Dr. Crichfield and Professor Pottinger are two fantastic examples of empowering others to fulfill purpose. In fact, you all guarantee the teachers that you put out into the world of education. Is that correct, Dr. Crichfield? I mean, that's one really cool thing about GCU. Will you just explain that just real quickly?
Absolutely. We have a GCU promise, a COE promise. It's forward facing on our website. If you are a part of our program, you graduate from our program, you have a concern, a problem, a question, you're stuck, you need some help from us, all you do is submit that form. Again, it's forward facing for you, and we will get back to you and make sure that you get all the support that you need in the classroom.
You know, you walk the walk, but you talk the talk, but you walk the walk. And I totally appreciate that. Folks, this has been a Canyon Professional Development webinar. It's called Educational Wave. We've been riding that educational wave, and we're going to get there to May with or without all of the challenges that come along with that. So please fill out our evaluation. We thank you for watching today, and stick around for the Q&A session.